Season 2 of the Strange, Rare, and Peculiar podcast, a place to learn more about homeopathy, deepening your knowledge, expanding your universe of possibility in the world of health and well-being through homeopathy.
Homeo what?
Homeo what?
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening.
It's afternoon here.
It is. It's Friday afternoon.
It's after lunch.
It's after lunch. This is a strange old time for podcast time.
It is. We usually podcast in the morning.
I know, when we're fresh and bouncy.
But I got coffee so that we could...
Well, that means that you're going to be...
I think
you're going to talk faster than normal.
This is decaf. It's decaf. What am I going to talk faster from decaf? Unless you bought me a coffee. This is a coffee from out because we actually went out into the wild today.
We sure did. We've been out in the wild a bit. This has been a hell of a week.
It has been
for us. Most important is that it was the first week of the academic year of 2023-24 Northern Hemisphere, but for all of our students peppered around the globe.
So amazing. Like the best week.
It was the best week, wasn't it?
We had the new classes, so the new full-time and part-time, brand new cohort started, plus the returning students. We've seen all the classes already, and we had clinic orientation.
Plus, can I say that I think we've done it pretty well this year?
What did we do well?
Because the lead into the first week of school included graduation from last year and a party.
And a party.
So we met a whole lot of folks, mainly returning students, but a few new ones came to the party.
You know what I want to do next time?
Party in Philly?
Now this year, because it rained.
Oh, not so good.
Yeah, and so instead of having our usual, sort of commencement exercise, we had people in 3 different rooms with a Zoom room going, which is totally fine. But what I would like to do is to have a more formal sort of recognition of incoming students who are there.
Oh, yeah,
and
totally.
a little mixer kind of thing for them to get together and talk.
Righty-ho.
Right?
Right, okay.
Yeah. I'm going to make a reference that you're not going to get.
What's that?
But maybe somebody who's listening will, is that I'm starting to feel a little bit like Lorelai Gilmore with my coffee.
This is in reference to the Gilmore Girls.
I love the Gilmore Girls.
I've never seen this social phenomenon.
You have not. I'm rewatching the Gilmore Girls.
Really?
Yeah.
This is from the 70s?
No. I'm not even sure when it's from. I was a late adopter.
Where did you first see it? Where were you when you were first watching it?
I was living in Brooklyn when I first watched it.
Oh, so you were...
That's
got to be 80s.
No. I lived in Brooklyn a few years ago. What are you talking about?
In the 80s? You didn't live in Brooklyn before the 80s?
No, but I didn't live in Brooklyn in the 80s.
Oh, you lived in Manhattan in the 80s?
Yeah. But anyway, let's just... This is going down a rabbit hole that was not... It was just a little coffee reference for anyone who...
Sure.
Because it's afternoon.
If anyone wants to write to me and tell me what the reference means, I'd appreciate it. Translation, that'd be good.
I can tell you. She drinks a lot of coffee. It's that simple.
There you go.
Yeah.
And in addition to the first week of school, we had another party that we went to last night. Boiron, America, was 40 years old.
Yeah. It was lovely. It was such a lovely event.
Great event.
They throw a good party.
They do. It's the second one that we've been invited to.
That's right. We went when they opened their new place.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
They throw a good party, good wine, delicious food.
Fantastic food.
Yeah.
I mean, they're French, and the wine was just
the bubbles were really good.
Yeah, we should probably start talking about that.
Okay. Anyway, but that's not what we're here to talk about.
No, because we're following on from last week, and I remember distinctly saying to you that we should talk about Hering's direction of cure. Yeah. Sometimes known as Hering's law.
Yeah.
Or rules of cure. And but I think, isn't there something else? Maybe is there something else we wanted to mention? Yeah, look, I did want to mention something because, excuse me, I've had a couple of amazing conversations with prospective students. Not just this week, but in the, over the summer. And I just want to shout out to the folks that have found their way to our school, because God knows how, they found their way to our podcast.
Yeah.
Like, for example, I was talking with Gina. She was, I mean, I think I heard it right. I didn't see her. She was on the phone at O'Hare Airport. And either she was, she might have said she was near there. And I said, how did you find us? And she said, your podcast.
I love that.
Shout out to you. Same with Rebecca in Mallorca.
Wow.
Hey, Rebecca.
Yeah. Hi,
Anyway,
people.
yeah.
I love that people listen to this. It's great because it's a fun conversation. Now, what
It's also fun for us. I think it's good for you and I.
but we do it really differently.
Well,
So-
in terms of preparation.
Yeah. How much preparation do you do?
Well, we also do it at the. How much preparation?
Oh,
Well, I
right.
don't talk about anything.
Okay.
But no, wait.
Huh?
I'm about to say something.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't open my mouth unless I have something to say. So the preparation that I would do is pre-podcast, pre. Like in terms of a topic,
Yeah.
I'm not going to talk about something I have
No.
nothing to
But
contribute
I just
to.
mean in terms of, what we're doing when we're here. I'm sitting here, as we're getting ready, I first ran to my bedside table to get my Kent's lectures, and then I came in your office where we record, and I said, I need an organon. And you said, they're all downstairs. Like, what kind of homeopath doesesn't have an organon right
Well,
there?
I've got one on my computer. I'm never without my computer.
I know, but your computer... Anyway, and then I went and got my organon, and then I have my iPad with
But
some
that's the difference between you and me. Folks, if you want to understand, so Denise has now got 4 books on her knee. She's going to drop something.
No,
her phone is about to fall on the floor. It's not even muted, is it?
It's always muted. That's why I tell people to text me if they're going to call, because I won't hear it.
Plus, at the same time as she's balancing a device and 4 books, she's also putting her hair up and drinking coffee with one hand.
That's the Lorelai
How can
Gilmore.
you live like this? You need assistance.
You know what? This is too long an intro. If I were listening to this, I'd be like, zzz, fast forward, get to the stuff.
All right. So Hering, Hering's direction of cure. Which you Lou, where do you want to take this? What's the key message at this point?
I think we have to start with the word cure. Hence all the books that I have.
Oh wow! So you're totally right. It's a misnomer, and therefore, are you going to be saying? At least this is what I would be saying, that the idea of a law of cure. Firstly, there's a problem with the word cure, and then there's a second with the word law. Let's start with cure.
Yeah, so if we're going to start with cure, we start with the second aphorism. Yeah?
Right.
So I just thought I would read it, and I happened to grab my
The highest
Wenda.
ideal of cure.
The highest ideal of cure is the rapid, gentle, and permanent restoration of health. That is, the lifting and annihilation of the disease in its entire extent in the shortest, most reliable, and least disadvantageous way according to clearly realizable principles.
6 things. 6 things. I give it again. Read it again. It's an important one.
The highest ideal of cure is the rapid, gentle, and permanent
1, 2, 3.
restoration of health.
All right, folks. Rapid. Is it rapid? Is it gentle? Is it permanent? And then?
Rapid and gentle are relative.
Totally. They're all relative.
Well, permanent is not relative.
After the event, or at least after a prescription, then permanent is also relative because you never quite know. If you're looking back at a case
Fair
from
enough.
5 years ago.
Right.
But what's after that? Because those 3 things have their 3 mates.
Restoration of health,
Restoration of health.
which means
We're going backwards.
you're going backwards.
We're always going backwards.
That is the lifting and annihilation of the disease in its entire extent in the shortest, most reliable, and least disadvantageous way.
Too many double negatives, Hahnemann. Where did you go to grammar school?
According to clearly realizable principles.
Least disadvantageous. Awesome.
In other words, it might suck.
Oh, yeah, or, hopefully most advantageous.
Yeah.
But those are 6 verbs, really.
There's a lot happening there. Now, Hahnemann, in his aphoristic style,
That was the first book falling.
the first book that fell, is don't predict that my coffee is going to spill.
We should be on video. We've got to do this on video.
I actually want our podcasts. Oh, if people could weigh in on this, I can
All right.
see.
No, this is really, really important. Okay, we're going to talk about Hering and Hahnemann.
Yeah.
But first, a question. We need your feedback.
Okay.
Shoot.
I can envision this podcast being turned into a graphic novel where you've got sort of caricatures of us sitting here, me with a pile of books and my and a carton of coffee, and Al smoking his Hahnemann pipe, in this this sort of funny and eclectic space.
And slurping my slurping.
You're no more slurping. Thank you,
I don't
Jennifer.
have a beverage.
Yeah, you have no beverage because you had an espresso.
The first thing is
up.
that I need to speak to international listeners, and it could just be my sheltered upbringing, but where I'm from, a graphic novel implies something which is R18. So that's
R18.
not what Denise is talking about.
No, of course not.
Right. So it's not a graphic novel. So describe what a graphic novel is. A graphic novel is.
It's just it has pictures along with it, like sort of comic book style, but
That's
longer format.
That's what
like
Denise means.
Alison Bechdel.
Yeah, totally.
Who I love.
Well,
okay, so imagine, though, that there's one part of this, which is sort of the narration and the ridiculousness of it. And then there's, like, serious content, So you sort of have serious content delivered inside of, kind of a fun devil-may-care way of being.
All right, so that's the question. The question is?
Could you imagine this, sort of serialized... what do you call it? Like publication of the podcast, Stranger and Peculiar, that has sort of this, one part is us doing it, and the other part is the historical actors and the content. I think it could be really fun.
Right.
Yeah.
There's the question, folks. Leave your answers at...
Or if you know how to do it. Somebody suggested there's some AI
There's probably
programs.
Some AI
Yeah.
action.
The thing that I'm a little bit worried about is because a friend of ours who we vacation with, who's an artist, who's an incredible artist, he does drawings of all of us when we're on vacation because we all sit and read in the morning or we do whatever we're doing. And he did one of me from the side and with my hair up on top of my head. I just look like a crazy granny.
You did, actually.
Yeah, and he's such a good artist that it was sort of...
No, it's a beautiful piece of art, but you did look like a granny.
Like a crazy granny. Yeah. So that's my fear of being cartooned.
Can I now that's so that what you just said about granny is irrelevant. The question, folks, is we need to know if there's any legs in this idea of a graphic.
Oh my gosh, I think it would be so much fun.
Of our podcast. All right.
Because the historical part, like, the little things that we do are sort of whatever. It's just context. But to take the historical information and the homeopathy information and sort of make it accessible, but it's also conversational, which is different than the type of learning. But, the different than the type of learning that one does on one's own. And because we are more often than not, directing people to primary sources, right? This is a way to get people into primary sources in a sort of non-threatening way. It's like, did you have Schoolhouse Rock in New Zealand? Do you know Schoolhouse Rock? No, you probably wouldn't have had that. So in America, we had, in the 70s, and I think it went on for a long time, they did these cartoons. Like, you wonder how I know the preamble to the Constitution. I know it from Schoolhouse Rock. I could sing the whole song. I won't, but it's like the things that get into our memory. And there was one like, I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill. And it tells you how something gets made into law, right? And they did it in cartoon form, but it was like a civics lesson in cartoon form. And I learned a lot from it. Like, I know the preamble to the Constitution by heart, which you wouldn't get.
The direction you're heading is somewhat concerning. Because, I mean, I would
Which
consider
you say to me
be,
on a daily basis.
Well, I consider you to be, like at the top, in the top 5% of educated people I know.
Wow.
Yeah.
You got to hang around with a better crowd.
No. And you are smart and you are knowledgeable about most things, not rugby, but you're getting much better. Learning. Sure is. But what I'm hearing is that you got there from learning...
From television? From Saturday morning television?
Saturday morning television and cartoons. Now, this is a concern because, of course, there is a gap in the homeopathic education market for games and cartoons, if that's the case.
I think people have done that over time. There have been...
Cartoons of Hahnemann, are you kidding?
Not cartoons of Hahnemann, but people have done sort of materia medica games. Anyway, we really have gone into such a cul-de-sac. And we got stuff to cover. My iPad's getting hot on my thighs. Okay, so...
All right, let's go.
Coming back, we might have to have in the show notes please feel free to fast forward between minutes 6 and 11.
So
Anyway.
aphorism 2, it's a really important one, because aphorism 1 says, like, why are we here? And aphorism 2 says, this is the end game. And it needs to be gentle, rapid, permanent, fast, and reliable, and and advantageous.
Yeah.
And most important, we are taking clients backwards.
Yep.
We are restoring the sick to health. The last time I looked, folks, if you look at that word in the dictionary, restoring means renewing, shining, bringing an old piece of furniture that's been, had 5,000 settings on it, bringing it back to its original state of health. That's what restore means. And
so actually, if we're going to talk about that, the word is cure.
Right. The reason we're starting here is cure.
And so I guess we should talk about the first aphorism. You alluded to it. I'll just quickly read it because it's the intent and motivation, right, behind it all. And I'm using the Wenda O'Reilly's 6th edition translation. The physician's highest and only calling is to make the sick healthy, to cure, as it is called.
Or, alternatively, the homeopaths' high and only mission is to restore the sick to health.
Yeah, putting that word restore back in it. In fact, that's the translation that I use when I teach it, because it has restoration in it. But the thing about it is, and this is why I felt like we needed to go backwards if we're going to talk about Hering's, whatever you want to call it, because it includes the word cure. And I think if you're going to talk about this fine art, there's a real difference, and it's like nested information, right? So for tech geeks out there, I've been learning to work with Obsidian, this note-taking app. And the idea is that you're making connections between things, right? So you're just taking bits of information, and instead of organizing them hierarchically, you're organizing them so that anything can connect to anything else. And you're almost creating like a Wikipedia idea where you've got these underscore links that you click to, and it takes you to more information about a particular topic. Yeah? And I think if we were to digitize the organon in that kind of fashion, you would have the word cure underscored, and you would have all of this nested information in every way that we approach the idea of cure, right? And cure, it's a really loaded and dangerous topic, right? Because if you are claiming to cure something, they can lock you up and throw away the key.
Well, in this country, yeah.
In this country. And so what we have to do a lot of the time when we're talking about homeopathy, especially, I mean, we get to really think about this because we're bringing it into the classroom and bringing sort of commonality of language into that space, right? So going through the words that we use and how do we use them and why. And so the word cure, which you start, from aphorism 1 on down, it's a mandate, right? But if we're going to talk about that, because it influences this idea of Hering's, whatever you want to call it, because on one hand, you would have to determine, are you really talking about cure? And if you're really talking about cure, that is the eradication of susceptibility. And if you're really talking about it at its deepest levels, you need to think about it miasmatically in terms of the theory of chronic diseases.
Are you saying it's much more than the removal of symptoms?
Absolutely. Right? And it doesn't... and
so therefore there's a kind of cure with a small c or a cure with a capital C, with a capital,
Yeah, because if you go to capital C cure, you're talking about, like, I think about how complicated this issue is because of, first of all, the differentiation between acute and chronic in homeopathy isn't always made clear. If you are curing, and again, every time I say cure, I want to put you to put your own air quotes around it. Yeah, there we go. So if you are curing something, you have to ask yourself, am I curing something that's acute? Okay, well, if it's acute, it's self-limiting. You're either going to get over it or you're going to die. So does it even matter? And then Hering's law or suggestion or whatever we're going to wind up calling it is about sort of how that process might look. But that process is going to be really different if you're dealing with something chronic or you're dealing with an acute exacerbation of a chronic, or in 21st century parlance, we're dealing with complex autoimmune conditions, so aberrations of the immune system that are manifesting in a variety of ways, sometimes at the same time. And so it's not as simple. So I think that the idea of aphorism 2, which we often simplify to say rapid and gentle cure, right, is the ideal.
So the ideal is quick and long-lasting removal of symptoms, especially in acute problems, and that's it.
And eradication of susceptibility.
Right.
Right? Because, you sort of have to look at this through the historical lens, right? So if we just kind of always go to the really basic thing of Hahnemann's journey, in other words, he didn't crap out a complete system of medicine, excuse my vulgarity, but at one time. He learned over the course of many, many years, from the late 1700s up until he died. Who knows what more might have happened had he lived longer. But, he got us as far as the 6th edition. And, the big changes that happened between 1816 and 1828 during his work on the chronic diseases, that deepens and problematizes the simplistic viewpoint of aphorisms 1 to 22, right? Or is it 1 to 21 or 22, whatever, however you cut it off. But basically where he's talking, the foundational bits in the beginning, they're oversimplified because he's giving us that overview. And then once you go from there, it becomes more and more complex, right? And so if we're going to go from Hahnemann, right, then we have to look at sort of the problematizer in chief for some of this. My buddy J.T. Kent. So if we go to Kent's lectures on philosophy, right, chapter 2, which is about aphorism 2, I mean, it's he digs in and he talks about why the allopathic medicine of his time is so challenging, that it creates more problems, He acknowledges Hahnemann's, in Materia Medica Pura, rejiggering of the order of symptoms and so forth, which of course gave Kent license to put so much emphasis on the mental symptoms, right, which underscored his way of thinking. The will, right, Swedenborgian idea of the will and a homeopathic remedy's ability to change it, But he also hit all of Kent's interpretations rely on him using that viewpoint. So in other words, when he says it is, so I'm looking at page 29 of my Kent. He says, if one were to ask a physician trained in homeopathic principles the same question of how we could demonstrate that somebody has been cured, one would find that there are means of distinctly demonstrating why he knows the patient is better. You would naturally expect, if it is the interior of man that is disordered in sickness, and not his tissues primarily, that the interior must first be turned into order and the exterior last. The first of man is his voluntary, and the second of man is his understanding. The last of man is his outermost, from his center to his circumference, to his organs, his skin, his hair, his nails, etc. So he says from there, cure must proceed from center to circumference. Compare that to George Vitulcus, right? And his sort of riff on that. It's close, but I didn't bring a Vitulcus Science of Homeopathy up with me, but everybody knows the cone, right? Where it's basically his visual representation of this same thing.
Yep.
It makes sense in a simplistic form, but how often do we really see clearly how this is happening, especially when we're looking at complex cases that could take 2, 3, 5, 10 years to reach a point of health, but perhaps without the capital C, air quotes, cure?
If I understand what you're asking, then for me, I would be saying for the first couple of decades in my practice, then 95% of my clients that were demonstrating some curative direction would follow exactly his paragraph.
What?
Yep. That the inside organizes, the outside starts to manifest more energy, less intensity of symptoms, less intensity or pain or itching with the skin. And if it's an example of someone that ends up doing really well, the way that happens would be in line with what Kent wrote, from my perspective, in my early days. There's only one example or cluster of examples that I would have seen, and again, I'm just going to stick to my first couple of decades in practice, where the opposite was true. And the opposite's true in augmentation, where I've seen, and I kind of fought against it for ages, but
You're talking about people who are seeing multiple practitioners.
no, I'm talking about those situations where people have come to see me and they said, since I had my facelift, or since I got my bum done, or my boobs done, I feel better in myself.
Oh, that's what you mean.
Yeah. And so, and I just resisted that, because what do you mean? You're just fixing the outside. How can fixing the outside, attend to the dramas and the complexities and the psychodynamics of the inside? But I've seen it categorically where confidence, where drama on the inside is better because I got my...
It could also be as simple
Cheeks
as
done.
a revenge haircut.
Well, okay. Well, it could,
Yeah.
actually. And so that's the only exception I have in my practice.
Okay.
To Kent's statement, and then Vathulkas's follow-up, that things proceed from the inside to the outside.
Well, but hold on here, because there's something really important that Kent doesn't address, which is the difference between acute and chronic.
Well, totally fine. But you asked me my opinion, and that's my opinion.
Yeah. We haven't actually stated what Hering's so-called law is, which is silly that we've waited this long.
Well, it is, but of course he never stated it. And
Exactly.
so
Well, that's what we're getting to.
All right. So,
Yeah.
those of you that think Hering sat down one night and
Said,
was
"This
at
is
a
my
loss
law."
and had a chewed on his pipe and stroked his beard and then wrote Hering's Law of Cure. Well, he didn't. It came along later, and it came along after a number of pupils and students attributed these statements to him, and as if it was a coherent thing. The challenge that we have is that if a law is a law, and that it applies in, let's say, all or most circumstances. And at the very, very least, we have to admit that this is not a law, but a set of guiding principles, and that's it. And of course, then the specifics are that cure takes place from the in out, from the most important organs to the least, top down, and I've forgotten one already.
I wasn't paying attention.
Yeah,
Sorry.
you never listen to me.
I do.
Top down, in out, least important to the most
And
important
oldest,
to the least,
and oldest to newest.
and in reverse order.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, Hahnemann in 1811 in Materia Medica Pura basically organizes the categories in that way, right? So you've got above, down, inside out, and parts to generals.
Really? Mm-hmm. What are you reading?
I'm reading something from Andre Sain. Which,
With reference to Hahnemann, but it's in your article there on
yeah.
Hering.
And so the thing is that when we look for, let me say one other thing, which is I definitely have seen the oldest to newest set of symptoms.
Oldest to newest.
Sorry, newest to oldest.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's that, what's that accounting principle? LIFO and FIFO, last in, first out.
I don't know. Yeah. I totally understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
But, in reverse order.
Yeah. I mean,
totally.
that kind of,
Have you got any examples where that's happened? I've got 1,000 of them,
give us one.
Well, what goes in terms of if someone is unconsciously living their life and they're drinking a bottle of vodka a day and eating Wendy's and every now and again a Reuben sandwich, then the body, as Hahnemann tells us, in various parts of the organ, but just we know intuitively, then
Sure.
our body starts to, shut down in various ways. And as long as it doesn't get too advanced, we've got structural damage to organs, then a good homeopathic remedy will, and probably some decent lifestyle advice, will start to reorganize that organism, and those symptoms will start to reverse. So whether it be the bloating, or whether it be the indigestion, and whether it be maybe the manifestation of all of that on the skin, the way that people unravel when they are under the care of a good homeopath very, very, very often will take place in the reverse order. Now, that doesn't happen every time, and that's the point that you're making. And so these principles that we hear about, Hering's principles of cure, there's no doubt that they exist, but they don't exist all the time, and they certainly don't all exist all the time in all clients together.
That's the thing.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, for me, reverse order, I don't have a problem with reverse order at all. Seen it truckloads of times. Yeah?
Yes, totally. I think where part of it comes from is the idea that if we're looking at it from a chronic disease perspective, right? Because I think acute diseases, it's more about the symptomatic order, whereas in chronic disease, it's going to be the expression of the disease, because it's going to be, usually multi-systemic and so forth.
Yep.
So if you would go, the inside out would be, if we're looking at, let's say, the big daddy of all cures, which would be the eradication of psora. Good luck with that. But I sort of suspect that there are a bunch of psoric plugs you can pull along the way, right? But that the idea is, it, as Hahnemann says, it starts with an eruption, right? And then it goes inward, and it just starts to disrupt more and more of the organism. Well, then if you're getting to the point where something is, ultimately being cured, that eruption would be the last thing to arise.
And it emerges.
Yeah.
And so often, along with this, we're talking about case management at the end of the day.
Yeah.
But we're always, always looking for that return of an old symptom. And we are quietly doing a gentle homeopathic dance when we see a return of an old symptom. And if it's a return of an old eruption, now so often these things happen in childhood. So it's very difficult for clients to remember. Like, when you're 4 years old and you've got something and mum puts on some, ointment, you don't know what it is.
I had a great example that I've been able to share this week, because a couple of weeks ago, maybe a couple of months ago, no, just weeks, I was taking care of a small child with skin issues. Mom had been in care for years, including during her pregnancy, during her labor, after birth, and then, this kid has gotten remedies. And it's really interesting to see that this child, who would have just various things over time, then starts to develop some skin things, right? Now, what was interesting about this case is that my understanding in knowing the parents, that this kid was born, I think, with, in terms of miasms, psychosis forward, right? And so they've done well with a couple doses of Meterinum for, a symptom picture that fit really beautifully. And I forget what other, there have just been little things, yeah? And then they start to get these skin symptoms. And I said, just wait. I said to Mom, let's give it some time. Let's see what it is. And then we had sort of a full picture emerge and could give a remedy that was inclusive of the larger case. But what I understood about this was that this is sort of the beginning of psora showing itself. So,
Becoming predominant.
So developed psora. So let's say that in terms of looking at a case through the lens of just the simplest, most elegant Hahnemannian chronic diseases way of seeing, enough psychosis was quieted so that the child could live in better health, then, psora starts to show itself. And then we're able to, give a remedy that would keep it from becoming more insidious and problematic. Now, the question that the student, because I got to use this example several times this week, students say, well, why did it happen at all if the mom was treated and then, blah, blah, blah. Well, because this is how it works to incarnate as a human. Do you know what I mean? Like, and I don't say that to be flippant at all. It's like we've got healing to do, whether it's, the equivalent of epigenetics, what we come in with, whether it's that one or another parent or within their lineage is a lot of sort of built up stuff. It's just, I think it's...
Are you saying this is interesting and still relevant? But are you saying that your kind of working model, when you say incarnating, is that we come into our bodies? Where at the moment of conception is a really big deal. We have our birth. We go into our first couple of seconds of life. Someone injects us with vitamin K. We're massively vaccinated in our early years. We go and we get our school lunches, and then as teenagers we start to dabble in chocolate, and then we start to try a cigarette or three, and then as young adults we have our first relationships, marriages, divorces, dramas. We spend a lot of time engaging, with stimulants, and when we end up going to see the homeopath, we are undoing that lifetime's events and choices, and so based on susceptibility, some of those choices will be because of our predominant miasmatic tendency. It might be syphilitic, could be psychotic. But what happens with good treatment is that gets dealt with, and in the reverse order, very often in the reverse order, or leaping back through some of those milestones that happen in life. And therefore, one day in clinic, when the client comes in clinic, what you're dealing with is you're dealing with early vaccine damage, or you're dealing with the psoric eruption. You're going backwards. But what always emerges is psora as you're heading towards cure. To me, if I understood you right, you're looking at me funny, but as I understood you right, cure is a small c and it's a process. It's almost a verb, really, or at least it's a movement towards something. But
there will be times when the eradication of a very particular susceptibility will happen. I think about this, right? So one of the cases that I teach in semester 4 is a case that some people who might have seen, I presented this at a conference once. It's a case of a person who had MS, and I say had in past tense. It took 9 years for her to become completely asymptomatic of that. Now, she didn't levitate and walk off into the sunset without anything else happening, and her life continues to go on. But there was a point, and there has been ever since, the point in life from which there are no more symptoms of MS.
Yeah.
Right? And I would say that because of the way that it unfolded in terms of judicious prescribing, it was only 4 different remedies over those 9 years, right? But that we pulled out the root of that, right? So that I would put in the capital C cure category.
Oh, okay.
Yeah?
Yeah.
But along the way, and this is where I think it's just so much more complex. Like, this is why I think there are interesting theories and guidelines and ideas, but the realities of 21st century prescribing go so far beyond this. And if I put in just a little plug for accountability in the education process, to teach Hering's law as if it is the beginning and the end, without discussing its origin, its application, and its complications, is to do students wrong, especially if they're not in a dynamic classroom setting where they get to ask all these questions. If all you're learning is how you answer that question on the CHC exam, then you might make case management decisions that are not appropriate,
not ideal.
Right? Because you're expecting, or you might think, well, it's going up, it must be bad. Well, there's an example Andre Sain uses about someone who has rheumatoid arthritis, which often manifests itself first in the knees and then will move to smaller joints. So if the knees, if the ankles and the feet heal before the knees because they're in the opposite order, then someone might assume that it's going in the wrong direction.
And change a remedy.
Change a remedy.
Right. But you're talking now about that third item, which is that cure takes place as we move forward. Things go from top to bottom.
That's right.
Up to down. I mean, I've got some examples of that. That's the least impressive one of these four for me. Yes, I've certainly had examples of skin eruptions that move down the body. I remember a kid who actually, one of the few bowel nosodes that I've given, that was very definitely the direction of the eruption. I've got a lovely case. I've had two cases that have ended up in stigmata, but one of them.
Oh, I love a stigmata case.
Yeah. One of them was again I can't remember if it was urticaria, eczema, something, but a skin eruption that just went down the body and left this guy with a mark there.
Stop it.
And a mark there, and I thought to myself, thank you, Constantine. That's very, very good. I'll just, not going to mess with the action of this remedy.
I'd send him to the priest.
And then, then a referral to the local vicar.
Wow.
Hello, vicar.
I want to know more about that.
So
Love a stigmata case.
I've got another one as well. But
I had a case once of a kid with Lyme, and the had a bullseye rash, like on his side, somewhere in the trunk, and it just got the remedy that was indicated, and it got bigger, and then it faded. So it never went back in.
That's interesting.
It just went out and it faded.
Huh. So other than the example you gave via Andre Sane, have you seen things going out the body? As people are getting better, and this is it, because the qualification in this is that we're not just talking about every case. We're talking about a case where they're improving, where people are improving.
I mean, look, I think part of what makes me question a lot of these sort of so-called laws is that, I work with complex autoimmunity as, that's kind of my day-to-day. And these cases they're not linear in any way. There's no up, down, inside out. It's there's more toggling, right? There's more there. So I think to understand these set of guidelines, right? I'd prefer to call them that. You also have to look at it with the fungibility of totality in play, right? Because as you said before, there's so much about case management, and I also want to throw something in because you threw out two little bombs that could prick the ears of people who are listening for confirmation bias on homeodetox and other things that I think can be not particularly helpful. And I say that as a person who right now has a boatload of young people in my practice for whom these detox protocols have not made them healthier. Let's just put it that way, which I find to be really upsetting. I dealt with one today. And it's taken me 2 years to get this kid back on track after being given sometimes as many as 20 or 30 remedies in a day. Yeah. So I just want to say, this is the kind of stuff that comes to the homeopath. Well, so this above, below, in, out. I mean, how many factors can one consider? You'd have to turn over your practice to AI in order for this to actually work. So the two bombs that you throw out was one, you take a case back until ultimately the vaccine damage comes up. Well, that doesn't mean that you give potentized. No, I know it's just an example, but people will hear that and make an assumption because they've been told. Then you give the tautopathic remedy of each of those vaccines in whatever. No.
Well, so it's an option, but no. You
right.
Don't need to, yeah.
But just wanted to be clear. And you also said about one of the few times that you've given a bowel nosode. Yeah. Remember I did that survey some years ago. It's going back a little bit. And I surveyed all the homeopaths that I admire who all have, a lot of experience. And I asked how often in, looking at their practice in the last 20, 30, 40 years have they used bowel nosodes, and not one of them gave me an answer over 5 times. Yeah. The most amazing homeopath. So, but it's really interesting because what I want to bring up here is going back to something we talked about with Compton Burnett, when we talked about James Compton Burnett and the idea of the nosode as the sort of final piece in the puzzle, right? That you were talking about how he would finish up a case with the nosode because he was matching the stop spot
of action.
Yeah. And so
such an interesting idea, that one. See, that is interesting.
So it's funny because I was thinking about that as I was, Hering. I mean, my thesis is mostly about Hering, so I spent the better part of a year reading everything Hering and all of the papers that we have of his. So everything from his letters and correspondences and, the family papers and everything. And I went through my notes looking, okay, what do I have that would indicate this, sort of law or idea? Didn't find it. Found nuggets, of things like we've talked about. But the thing that really struck me is how would Hering reconcile his sort of dance with reductionism around the bacteriological agent or that infectious agent. I mean, when he died, he hadn't come up with a full set of answers, but just adding another factor into this multifactorial conversation, right? If you're going back to the person who ostensibly introduced it, just thinking about his concepts, right? Or I shouldn't say concepts, what he was grappling with in terms of his understanding, you could see that he would hit a wall. Does that translate all the way through? It's a bit of an unfinished connection.
I think it's worth finishing it to an extent, because one of the things you've taught me over the years, I've said this to you probably just privately, and that is that what your research taught me was in my lazy earlier decades of homeopathy, I would have said, you're talking about nosodes, or you're talking about the application of the problem, the application of same, if it is
like an isopathic application.
Yeah, and so if it's a herpetic eruption, or if it's a staphylococcal eruption, if it's COVID, if it's Omicron, whatever the different variants of, then you would be giving a remedy made from.
Right.
But what you taught me is that Hering was not that sophisticated. He had a lot of toys. He had a lot of technological toys, but there was no agreement. He had the
$750 microscope.
But there was no agreement about what substance actually contains the cause.
Exactly.
And is it?
And he got it wrong a few times.
Right, totally. And so, it's just amazing to me because people go, serenum. Well, hang on, what is serenum?
Right.
Or
likely not what we think it is, just based on his, how he got it and where he got it from.
Yeah, and the same with your discussion on pyrogen and
sepsin.
And sepsin. So totally fascinating. What's the substance within the human body or the fluid that actually contains the virgo? How do we isolate that, which is the exciting cause to the latest?
That's just it.
And
Hering was struggling with this because the exchange that he had with Swan about constituents in the blood.
That's it. That's the point.
Yeah. He said, now I have to remember the reference. He says he and Swan are writing back and forth. Swan wants to know if Hering has ever proved septic blood.
Yep, that's right.
And Hering said, no, but I know a guy. There's a guy. I got a guy like in Cincinnati, Wormley in Chicago, I think is who it is. And he's got a microscope that, he thinks he can extract it to figure out what the active agent would be, right? And then so in this discussion, he goes back and forth about the whole and the part. Could I give a plug for my book right at this very moment?
Yeah, go buy the book.
Oh my gosh, because I'm super excited. My thesis, which is available through the Johns Hopkins library now. I didn't even know. Somebody told me that they got it. I'm like, how'd you get it? And it's because it's been published through the library, but I'm also having it made into a book. And I just met with Priscilla Metters today again. And next week will be the final design. And the book has more than just the thesis, which is done by submission criterion and so forth. But this has got photos and some of the primary source materials that I used in my research. There will be some of those documents so you can get a sense of like Hering's handwriting and some of the letters and so forth. Anyway, so that hopefully will be available both in digital and print copies by mid-October. It's like just about there. So within a month.
Yeah, totally.
I can't even believe it. But the point was...
Well, no, I think we've done the point. What I was going to say, the next step is, I think if I've got it right, we've discussed 3 of the 4 elements of Hering's principles of walking towards a curative place. But the one we haven't talked about is it goes from the most important organs to the least important organs. And I think that one is, that's suddenly we've got to start talking about important organs and unimportant organs.
Well, so it's more survival organs, isn't it?
Right, exactly.
And so what's really, I think the learning nugget from it is you need to know how and when and what to prescribe on. I mean, if we go back to the Burnett conversation again, the person who had all of those seemingly heart-related symptoms for which digitalis or some other, heart-specific remedy would have been given, when in reality, what was the problem in reality? It was your example. When we did the Burnett podcast.
No idea.
Oh.
I don't remember what I did this morning.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, basically, if you got one of something, that's important. If you got 2 of something, then you can probably, lose one and.
Oh, you're talking about organs. I was like, where are you going with this? You mean like you could spare a kidney but not a liver?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't need both testicles, really.
You're ridiculous. Anyway.
So the point.
You should see his face. Every time you say something naughty, you.
I think Vithulkas overcomplicates it, actually, somewhat. I mean, I totally appreciate the effort that he made when in his cone diagram. Of course, it's cones within cones.
Yeah.
And that's in the science of homeopathy. And but he makes a good point. If someone's schizophrenic, that's serious. But is it as serious as a heart condition, or is it as serious as a chronic cough? Well, in what way do people get better? And sometimes it does. People's symptom focus does change from, say, the mental plane,
to
a say chronic respiratory situation,
yep.
before it then heads back to generalized existential anxiety or whatever it might be.
But there was one other point that I was making, though, inside of the lesson, right? Which is you also need to understand how to deal with something. So if you've got an organ issue, in what way is it appropriate to support the organ? How small a totality remedy? How large? And this is where I think the oversimplification of homeopathy becomes really problematic, because the OTC prescriber or the person who's doing some Facebook learning isn't thinking about the 40 steps that go through a skilled homeopath's mind before they make a clinical decision. So for example, an example that I'll use from our clinic from years ago, this one always stands out to me. We had a guy who was going through cancer treatment, and he had like a liter of fluid extracted from his lungs every third day or something. And the students were, they're analyzing the case, and they're going like this huge totality thing. Give him sulfur. I'm like, you kill him. You needed a small totality remedy to do a targeted job. So this idea of fungible totality becomes really important. When do you use a deep antisoric remedy, and when is that too deep and asking too much of the vital force? Right? When is it appropriate to give an acute within chronic treatment? Sometimes you absolutely have to push a case along, right? But sometimes to do that, I used the example of that, the case of the woman with MS, and only 4 different remedies over 9 years. Well, it's not that she didn't have sort of acute things come up. She would have UTIs. Well, I sent her to my friend the herbalist, because I didn't want to mess around while her, where she's rebuilding a nervous system, to start giving acute homeopathic remedies. And I think, sometimes people get all over the place when, if you really get down to understanding, all of the big things like chronic diseases, like, whatever the order of cure is, the, importance of different hierarchy organ-wise, the fungibility of totality. Do you know what I mean? Acute chronic remedies. Sometimes what I love with the advanced students is when we're looking at a repertorization for a chronic case, right? So it's at the end of a clinic day, and we've gone through all of our steps, and we've got a repertorization, and students are going through, say, the 20 to 25 remedies that come up in the final repertorization, and they'll be going, the yes, no, no, yes, no, whatever. And the newer students are like, wait, how do they know that? And what criteria are they using? And a lot of times it will be the remedy is too acute, right? You've got a chronic case that needs a chronic remedy. You're not going to give staphysagria or aconite or whatever, And so this, there are all these different things that come into play. So if we kind of circle back to where we started, which is Hering's Law of Cure, or Aphorism 2, rapid and gentle cure, you kind of have to get clear about what that cure means. Is it capital C, actual eradication of susceptibility or miasmatic predisposition? Or is it cure, meaning you've got lots of small wins along the way as you're dealing with that?
Great. So at the end of the day, what's the moral of the story is that, you're saying to hold on to Hering's Law of Cure as it's written is way too simplistic. There's far more going on.
Far more.
And additionally, in addition to the far more going on, those 4 points happen some of the time in some cases, but not all of the time in all cases.
Exactly.
Right.
And if you take that as a law instead of as a guide, and you try to apply it inside of a chronic, the unraveling of a chronic disease, it doesn't always work that way, because sometimes, right, one of the things, here's a way to problematize it. One of the things that I have found happen, and I'm curious, I don't know if we've ever talked about this. You've got a case, and you're, how Hahnemann talks about complicated diseases, right? So sometimes, and this is like there's that bundle of aphorisms like from the mid-30s to 50, which is going through, it's
How homeopathy works.
How I can't even talk, how homeopathy works. And you get to, I think it's aphorism 49 with complicated diseases. But, he talks about that sometimes, that like when he's talking about, can you only have one disease at a time because the stronger one will suspend the weaker one, blah, blah, blah. But one of the things that goes beyond that I find is that sometimes you'll have a client and they've got this one big facet of their case. And I see this mostly in complex autoimmune cases. So they got this one big facet and you kind of get it managed. You haven't like cured it per se, but it gets quiet enough so that they have enough energy to do their life, and maybe something else sort of shows itself. So you haven't fully dealt with that problem from before, but you've solved enough of it so that the organism gets so much more vitality that they're doing really well, right? And that becomes like the sleeper issue, and then something else might come up. And it could be that you're talking about it through a miasmatic perspective, but it could also be that there are sort of these like cells of energetic disturbance that maybe are part of one larger disease, but maybe are sort of another dimension of, aphorism 49 or something. And I wonder, and is this, I often think about when people say, well, homeopathy, it's so old, you need to jazz it up or whatever. But I think the principles, as Hahnemann says, it's based on universal law. It doesn't change, but we change, right? Humans, the diseases, and also, like you were talking about before, all of the stuff that gets done to our bodies, we now are how many generations of processed food, monoculture farming, lots of vaccinations, lots of suppressive medications, people who are on immunosuppressants, and whatever that sort of, intergenerational stuff that comes through, create sort of a multidimensional chess game for the homeopath to play. The rules still apply, but you've just got to kind of expand the periphery just a little bit, because you're just holding space to watch this dance occur, right?
So all in all, these are not laws, these are principles. Of the 4 principles, would you add anything to them?
I don't think I could. I don't think I simply could. I mean, would you? What would you add? How would you?
The one that I think is, because, I totally agree with what you're saying, is like, you don't need to add anything to homeopathy, but we do know a lot more about psychodynamics since Hahnemann's day. And the one thing that I've noticed as my clients are getting better, most of them become more present. So if there's a fifth, I'd say Alastair's fifth principle of cure is that when people are getting better, they become more here and now. They become more present. They're less in the future. They're less in the past. And I think I've seen enough of that. In addition to that, you could say, you can, if I think I'm pretty accurate with that one. I've just noticed that, and it's kind of an obvious thing to say.
No, it totally
but
is.
Hering doesn't talk about it as a
Right.
principle of cure. When I think, if it is a case management decision of, am I going to give the same remedy or change the remedy? Am I going to, adjust the posology or the potency or whatever? Then are they more present? You know how you tell?
How?
Because they walk in the room and they say, how are you?
Ah.
But
you don't think some of them are just the nice people?
No, well, I mean, some of them are nice, but they weren't nice at the beginning when they were focused on their fingernail vision. And they were focused on, the dramas and the hysteria of life.
I mean, that's the nature of suffering, right? You can't. Kent says a man in health is unaware of his parts.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
And so I'm not saying anything I'm just repackaging something that's being said before, but but a person that's getting weller, or is really well, is not aware of their parts.
Right.
Hering doesn't mention that.
That's a really good point.
Huh.
He does. So if we kind of compare this to how we use the MyCough for our outcomes in cases, right?
Everyone's a zero.
Well, but we ask, we do measurement of two main symptoms, right? It's on a scale of 0 to 6, 2 main symptoms, and then overall well-being, and then relationship with the practitioner, and have you done anything else, right? And so in a way, Hering, the 1 and 2 are kind of like, related to sort of the symptomology that he's tracking in direction of core, but he's leaving out the overall sense of well-being, and maybe that's not a 19th century conversation.
I don't think so. No, I think that's a 20th century augmentation to home.
Yeah. So, we just finished up by talking about, I can't even. Sometimes I'm really glad we're not on video.
Yeah.
We just finished up with a little reference to our research, and next podcast, I think we're going to do a research update, aren't we?
I think it's really time. It's critical. It's time that you all heard about what on earth we've been doing in the research office in 2023.
It's a lot. It's really a lot. And one of the things that we have not done is gotten advertising for the podcast, primarily just because we haven't really thought about it. I advertise for my book, but you could get it free through the Johns Hopkins Library. It's just if you want the actual book. And Priscilla told me about her idea for the cover today, and I'm so jazzed.
Nice.
Yeah. Anyway, we haven't advertised, although I should mention Athletic Greens because they seem to sponsor every podcast that I listen to. But we don't really put out the call for donations for the foundation, and we probably should be hawking that on every corner at every time because, and we'll probably talk about this a little bit next time, but Home Foundation and the Homeopathy Help Network and HHN, we really run so much on volunteer labor, and it's a lot, and there's so much work that needs to be done, and we need to be able to really underwrite that. So if you or someone wants to support homeopathy in a monetary way, I know there are lots of places that you can give your homeopathy support dollars. So just think about us as a part of that. We're going to do a more formalized campaign, but there's a donate button on the website. And it would just be really helpful.
Homefoundation.org.
O-R-G. Yeah, and it's HOHM foundation.org.
Yeah.
Thanks for thinking about that.
All right.
Yeah, next time a research update.
Can't wait. Let's do it tomorrow.
You want to record again tomorrow?
Why?
Nah. All right.
See you, folks.
See you later.
HomeopathyHelpNow.com offers quality acute and chronic homeopathy care. All consultations are conducted virtually. The team at HHN is made up of volunteers ranging from students under supervision to AHE graduates to certified practitioners. When you get care through HHN, you have a full team on your side. Your case contributes data to the Home Foundation Research Office, and your donations help to provide care to those in need.